What's good, you guys? Welcome to the first episode, Identity of Ray's Raw. I'm Georgie Ray, also go by the names Jay, Gigi, Georgia, George, Noodle, and others I will not mention due to being inappropriate. Daddy. My pronouns are she, her, and this podcast is designed for those who sit within the LGBTQIA plus community, those who sit outside, and those who sit somewhere in between. Within the spirit of kindness, to educate, challenge perspective, bring awareness and visibility to the surface. I took inspiration for our first episode from a comment that was left recently on one of my TikToks where I was presenting in a suit, and that comment said, "Sorry, darling, wearing men's clothes is trans, not les." Now, firstly, I'm just going to give this person the benefit of the doubt and just assume they are lacking an understanding of just how vast and fluent an individual's identity can be within our community while throwing around terminology and their definitions while making assumptions. Secondly, I will be talking from personal experience and opinion, which is extremely important to remember. My views do not represent everyone's views from my community. I'm only responsible for myself. That is all I can handle. And nor is my voice higher or greater than other humans. This podcast is dedicated with love and bring unity, and I will only be saying this once, but I will not tolerate any hatred or disrespectful comments. Of course, it's okay to give your perspective. Everyone's voice is validated, but do so in a respectable manner. If not, I will have no trouble in just deleting and blocking you. I'm an Aquarius, so I have no issue whatsoever with ghosting your ass as soon as I sense any bad energy up in here. We're keeping it zen. This assumption may be correct for some. It is not for myself. And if I can help open people's minds up to a greater understanding that allowing people to tell us who they are rather than us telling them who they are, then there is far more purpose and impactfulness and beauty in that. So that will be my why for this episode. The definition of identity is the fact of who or what a person or thing is. Interesting, because what I get from that is you can identify as a fucking bed frame if you wanted to, if that is your fact. Rad. But to elaborate, I think we need to remember it's not just black and white. You've got so many things to consider: race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, spiritual, religious beliefs, unique characteristics, etc., etc. So I think when you are talking about identity, it's important to remember there's a bigger picture to that. There are people who are sure in their identity, there are people who are still figuring it out, and there are people who are constantly changing their identity. All these three options are to be normalized. You should feel no shame in wherever you sit along your journey. I think that's the beautiful thing, is our role as humans is to be our own human. And, you know, despite all the challenges I know we've all had at some point in our life while figuring out identity, there is no two of the same person on this universe. There's got to be something in that, right? I have constantly been questioned around identity my entire life, and while that has sometimes been exhausting, the steps forward outweigh that, because I think as a generation we're finally starting to see just how important these conversations are to have for people to feel valued and seen. You know, that's my point here, is I would rather someone ask questions a million times knowing so that they're doing with curiosity and to just gain a better understanding than to not ask and just assume, maybe because their identity may be completely left field to mine. I'm going to focus on gender identity for this episode, keeping in mind sexual orientation is something different for me. So we're going to take it back to my childhood, where I'm going to share a couple of personal experiences, and I'm going to explain why this comment does not have to apply to everyone. There are many defining moments for me as a young child where I think someone looking in would question if I experienced gender dysphoria, but I'm going to explain my truth as a fully self-aware adult, and just how I think some people may be misunderstood when making assumptions like this one. And hopefully by sharing with you guys these memories and the way I perceived them at the time to now being able to understand that and break that down, hopefully some of you, maybe even one of you, might be able to relate, or you may know someone that went through similar experience. I grew up in a very typically cricket and AFL sports obsessed family. Rightly so, I played in all boys team sports growing up. And every night we would go out the front to practice, my siblings and I. We'd get all the kids from the surrounding neighbourhood to come play with us. And being surrounded by so many boys growing up and being in that scene, they would all naturally take their tops off, playing sport as you do as a kid when you get a bit sweaty or whatever. Me being me, it was like, fuck it, I'll get my kid off too. And it didn't really become an issue until I got a little bit older, and obviously my breasts started to develop, and mum had to have constant conversations with me where you'll hear me talk a lot about my mum during this podcast, because she's been such a huge part of playing a role in who I am as a person, and she's always been super supportive, but this was probably the one thing where she put her foot down on, and it was just non-negotiable. So I'd be having these conversations with mum, and for the life of me, I just couldn't understand why I had to have them. I couldn't understand why everyone else could take their top off and I had to leave mine on. During these conversations with mum, I can remember thinking that if I cried loud enough or stomped my feet a little harder, then she would cave. But she would always sit me down and, speak to me about it not being appropriate. And if you are someone now as an adult who chooses to free the nip, like myself occasionally, love that for you. But back then, I wasn't of age to understand why that wasn't acceptable. Mum was just doing her role as playing a loving, protecting parent. During experiencing this, though, I never once thought I was a boy or had the desire to be a boy. I didn't necessarily feel like I was a girl either, though. I knew I was a girl because I was told I was a girl, and I was obviously born into a female body. But I never felt the need to be labelled as a child or to explore that. I was just Georgie. To be honest, I still don't know how to explain that as an adult. I think some people may look at that and go, okay, so you were non-binary as a child. Possibly. Some other people may look at it and go, maybe you were just too distracted on Lego to feel the need back then to consider even thinking about gender identity. Possibly. Whichever one it is, though, I'm not fussed about. All I know is that I have always been a very confident person, and I was just a happy and healthy kid, and that'll just about do it for me. This was probably the first big realization for me that I started to understand. I expressed myself through the confidence of my body. So at the time, by taking my top off and wanting to be free and express that, I was thinking, well, I feel good. I look good, I feel myself, so what's the issue? And it became more apparent in my adolescent years that I started to express that same attitude in the choice of clothing that I wore, and that continued onto my adult years. Naturally, as I got a little older, I fell into my gender identity, discovered I love being a woman, wouldn't change a thing, but that urge to still show up and dress how I want to dress has always remained strong. It has always been something for me in allowing myself to express myself, not only the physicality of it, but in my behavior and attitude, just the way I show up in life. So I believe the word this person was looking for is cross-dresser. I've always dressed quite androgynous. That's never going to change. Let's just read out for insight the definition of cross-dresser. Cross-dressing is the act of wearing clothes traditionally or stereotypically associated with a different gender. From as early as pre-modern history, cross-dressing has been practiced in order to disguise, comfort, entertain, and express oneself. The term cross-dressing refers to an action or a behavior without attributing or implying any specific causes or motives for that behavior. Cross-dressing is not to be mistaken with transgender. So in response to this person's comment, I would say, sorry, darling, but wearing men's clothes can possibly just be cross-dressing, not necessarily transgender. And wrong again, because I'm still a big leso. You should stick around and hear how I made that discovery, maybe in my next few episodes, darling. So while there are still a few question marks hanging over my head at a young age around gender identity, I don't feel the desire I have to go back and explore that or figure it out, because I do believe in just allowing children to be children before the world tells them who they should be, and they will come out their most authentic, beautiful self, and they'll figure it out. And that, I do believe, is why I'm so comfortable in my skin now, is because I believe that journey was made for me. Anyway, what am I saying? I do want to say that that's not the case for everyone within my community, just because I didn't experience any distress around gender identity while I was figuring it out, or not figuring it out in my case. That's not the scenario for a lot of people, and I'm not disregarding their experience. I'm just opening people's eyes up to being cross-dressing doesn't necessarily mean that you are transgender. Another challenge I faced around cross-dressing was when I got to high school. And it wasn't a challenge for me because I wanted to wear whatever the hell I wanted. But obviously the school has regulations that you need to obey. And let's be honest, I've never been good at following any set of rules. If you tell me go left field, I'm going right. I went to a Christian high school growing up, and we were required to wear skirts that came down to your ankle, or typically dresses that came down to your ankle. Sexy as all hell. This may be hard for some people to understand, but some mornings I would wake up and I would happily wear the required uniform. And other mornings I would go to school in my dress, but pack my shorts in my backpack and go to the bathroom before school started and quickly change. But most mornings I would wake up with such frustration, and I was always just so upset that I didn't have a choice in what I got to wear, and that really affected me. So I would again cry, kick and scream. Poor mum went through a lot.
to mum, and I'd be like, I'm fucking not going if I have to wear that shit, basically. And mum would have to write me a note every single day just to get my ass to school. Otherwise, I would just write my own note and I'd forge my dad's signature. Sometimes the office would ring dad and be like, oh, did you actually write this? Because it looks like a 5-year-old's written it. I never really had great handwriting. And I would get in the shitter. Mum would just write notes a lot of the time for me and send them into the teachers. I think she knew it was the only way I was going to get an education, and also she just had my back. She never questioned me. She never questioned why I needed to wear my sports uniform because I felt comfortable in that. There was no judgment from her whatsoever. And it's funny because a few years ago, my sister and I were in hysterics because we found the diary that I used to write in all the letters to my teachers. And some of the excuses that mum would come up with, it would literally be like, George is wearing her sports uniform today because the dog peed on her skirt and we have to hang it out on the wash. Next day, George is wearing her sports uniform today because she's feeling a little under the weather and the sports uniform provides to be warmer than the dress. Like the most shitty excuses, but I love that mum did that for me because, although she probably didn't understand it and understand why, she just knew I needed that support from someone. And I will always cherish her for that. I did cop it a lot from the teachers, and again, it wasn't their fault. They're just doing their job. They're just doing what's required. But I think back then, if you go outside this guideline as a kid, you're just perceived to be a little prick. Like nobody takes into consideration, identity, disability, learning difficulties. Nobody took the time to understand why someone is behaving the way they're behaving, or that there could be something more to that. I spent a lot of my time in high school in detention. That's not something I'm proud of. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be that one misbehaving or not being able to follow the rules. But something I have always been strong in and will always stand for is being anything outside of my authentic self is not an option for me, nor will I ever allow it to be, regardless of the ramifications. I got so used to spending time in detention alone while I watched my friends pass by all around me that I decided I was not going to cave to society's expectation of how I should be. I decided to keep showing up. I felt like it almost became my purpose to be there so that if another kid felt how I felt and was just wanting to express themselves in the way they dressed and felt most comfortable and they were being punished for that, that I would be there. They wouldn't be alone. I think it's important to remember identity stems from beliefs and beliefs can change. You can learn at any pace and discover your way. That's what makes our identity ours. I think assuming someone's gender identity without comprehending that you need to understand the word identity first is extremely outdated, and us as a generation need to start making a conscious effort to educate ourselves in not just seeing the first layer of someone, but allowing them to show us their other layers. It can take a split second for someone to feel unvalued or shut down. And we can avoid this by simply asking, do you have a gender identity? If so, may I ask how you identify? What are your pronouns? When I'm communicating with you or to other people, What vocabulary can I use to support your wishes and needs? You will find most people are willing to be open about identity. Again, open being the bigger picture. If you are approaching someone from our community, please keep in mind to do so in a gentle, open-minded, respectful manner, because that will make all the difference between someone allowing you in and someone not. And if you're not sure on how to do so, educate yourself on that. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, go do so. It's just Georgie Ray. I'm going to have a question box, an anonymous question box available for you guys where you can have your input, write in any questions, concerns, advice that you may need. That is my roommate singing. Wowzers. Get it, boy. Hit them high notes. Fuck, I forgot what I was saying. Yeah, anyway, come say hi, basically. It's going to be a good time. What are the odds that this is a queer song? I'm on the right track, baby. I was born to be brave. Right track, baby.